There's a device bolted onto almost every semi-truck in America. On a steep mountain grade, it can be the one thing standing between a loaded 80,000-pound rig and a runaway with no brakes left. The man who invented it nearly died in exactly that situation. And yet all across the country, towns have made it illegal to use. So why would America tell its truckers to shut off the device that keeps them alive? To understand why that device matters, you have to understand what happens to a heavy truck on a long descent without it. A truck slows down by turning motion into heat. Press the pedal, the brakes clamp down, and the energy of all that weight gets converted into heat in the brake drums. On flat ground, that heat has time to fade away between stops, but point a fully loaded truck down a mountain grade that runs for miles, and the brakes never get a rest. They just keep absorbing energy, and the drums keep getting hotter, past 500 degrees, and climbing. At a certain temperature, the brakes simply stop working. The friction material glazes over and loses its grip, and the pedal goes soft under the driver's foot. This is called brake fade, and the cruel part is how quietly it arrives. There's no bang and no warning light. The driver just presses the pedal a little harder each time, gets a little less back, and slowly realizes that a machine weighing tens of thousands of pounds is picking up speed downhill with nothing left to stop it. For the early decades of trucking, this wasn't a rare event. It was a known hazard of the job, something drivers feared and planned their whole descent around. In 1981 alone, federal records counted nearly 2,500 runaway truck incidents. The problem was serious enough that states began carving emergency ramps into the sides of the mountains, long beds of loose gravel angled uphill, built for one purpose, to catch a truck that could no longer stop itself. Hundreds of those ramps still sit beside steep grades across the country today. They exist because brake failure on a mountain was never a freak accident. It was predictable. The man who finally solved it had lived through the nightmare himself. His name was Clesie Cummins, the founder of the Cummins Engine Company and one of the most important figures in the history of American diesel. In August of 1931, he set out from New York, bound for Los Angeles, driving a diesel-powered truck with two companions. On the back was his own diesel race car, the one that had just run the Indianapolis 500 without a single pit stop. The whole trip was a rolling advertisement meant to prove to a doubting public that diesel was reliable and to break the cross-country speed record while they were at it. For 4 days, everything went to plan. Then, on the evening of the 5th day, they reached the top of Cajon Pass, a steep, winding descent on Old Route 66, dropping down into San Bernardino. The road was narrow gravel cut into the mountainside with sharp switchbacks and no guardrails. Cummins started down in too high a gear, and the loaded truck began to gather speed almost at once. He reached for the shifter to drop down, but the truck was already moving too fast to make the change. So he went to the brakes and found them already fading from the upper part of the grade, giving him less and less with every push. The smell of scorched brake lining filling the cab, the truck was running away on a narrow mountain road in the failing light with a full load and no way to slow it down. And at the bottom of the grade, a set of railroad tracks crossed the road and a freight train was moving across them. Cummins came around the final curve with nowhere to go and no way to stop. In his own words, the train's caboose cleared the crossing just as they reached the tracks. They had escaped death by inches. He brought the truck to a stop on the far side with his hands shaking and he never forgot it. For the rest of his life, he believed the diesel engine that had nearly killed him that night also held the answer. The answer was hiding in something every diesel engine already does. On its compression stroke, a diesel piston rises and squeezes the air in the cylinder into a tiny space, far harder than a gasoline engine does, at compression ratios of around 17:1 and higher. That takes an enormous amount of work, and it packs the compressed air with energy, like winding a spring. In normal running, the engine gets all of that work back. Fuel ignites in the hot, compressed air, and the burn drives the piston back down with even more force than it took to compress. The spring pushes back. Clessie's insight was simple and strange. What if you let the spring go without letting it push back? If you could open the exhaust valve at the very top of the compression stroke, right when the air is squeezed tightest, that compressed charge would rush out through the exhaust before it could shove the piston down. The engine would do all the hard work of compression and get nothing in return. Every cylinder on every stroke would be stealing energy from the truck instead of adding to it. Turn that loose across all 6 cylinders, and the engine stops being a motor and becomes a brake, one that works through the driveline itself and never touches the service brakes at all. And because a diesel squeezes its air so much harder than a gas engine, there is far more energy to throw away, which means far more braking force. The very thing that makes a diesel is what makes it such a powerful engine brake. Having the idea was one thing, getting it built was another. Cummins was forced out of his own company in 1955, and only then, in retirement, did he finally chase the idea that had haunted him since Cajon Pass. By 1957, he had a workable design, using motion already built into the engine to crack the exhaust valve open at the right instant, and he patented it. He took it first to Cummins, the company that carried his own name. They passed, so he brought it to the Jacobs Manufacturing Company, a Connecticut firm best known for making drill chucks, and they saw what his own company had missed. The connection came almost by accident. A relative of Cummins was dating the daughter of a Jacobs executive, and that is how the Chuck Company first heard about the idea at all. Officially, the system was called the Jacobs Engine Brake, but drivers wasted no time shortening it to the Jake Brake, and the nickname stuck to it forever. Turning the concept into a product that could bolt onto engines already in service took real engineering. The Jacobs solution used the engine's own oil pressure as the muscle. A housing sat above the valves, filled with small master and slave pistons, and when the driver flipped a switch in the cab, pressurized oil armed the system. Motion already built into the engine squeezed that oil into a hydraulic punch that snapped the exhaust valve open at exactly the top of the compression stroke, then let it close again many times a second, perfectly timed. Later versions even let the driver choose how hard to brake, switching on more or fewer cylinders to match the engine's grip to the grade. The first production units shipped for Cummins engines in 1961. Just 360 of them sold that first year. But once drivers felt what it did, it spread fast, first to Detroit Diesel, then Caterpillar, then Mack, until nearly every heavy engine in America could be ordered with one. For a driver, it changed everything. For the first time, a trucker could crest a mountain grade, switch the system on, and ride the whole descent down with his foot completely off the brake pedal, the engine holding the truck back with a steady, unshakable resistance that never faded no matter how long the grade ran. The anxiety that had defined mountain driving for decades simply lifted. Brake wear dropped, breakdowns dropped, and the runaway that had haunted the trade became rare. Since that first small batch, more than 10 million Jake brakes have been built. But the same trick that saved the truck came with a sound nobody had planned for. When the engine brake fires, it dumps that compressed air out through the exhaust over and over, dozens of times, every second. On a big diesel at speed, those releases blur together into a hard, rattling machine gun bark, the sound anyone who lives near a mountain highway knows instantly. On an open interstate, it is just part of the background of trucking. But roll a loaded truck down a grade through a sleeping town at 2 a.m, past bedroom windows with nothing but night air to carry it, and that bark becomes something people will not forget and will not forgive. And this is the detail that gets lost in the argument. Most of that noise doesn't even come from the brake itself. It comes from the exhaust. A truck with a proper muffler running its engine brake is relatively quiet. The ear-splitting version comes from trucks running straight pipes with little or no muffling, a setup that is illegal in many places, but popular anyway. And it is those trucks that give the whole system its reputation. The engine brake got blamed for a noise that was mostly coming from a missing muffler. The complaints piled up, and the towns answered with a sign that became one of the most familiar fixtures on American roads. No engine braking. Sometimes it read, "No Jake brake," often with a dollar figure for the fine printed right underneath. It is worth being clear about what those signs actually are, because it is not a national ban. There is no federal law against the device, and every one of those trucks still rolls off the line with it built in. What the signs represent is a patchwork of local ordinances, town by town and county by county, outlawing the use of engine braking in certain areas, almost always residential stretches, where a grade runs close to where people sleep. And the debate behind them is genuine, with a real case on both sides. The residents have a point. Nobody should have to be jolted awake at 2 a.m. by a noise like gunfire, and a muffled truck could often use its service brakes through a short stretch of town and save the engine brake for the open road. But the drivers and the safety people have the harder point to answer. The signs tend to appear exactly where a grade meets a neighborhood, which is precisely where a heavy truck most needs to be holding itself back with the engine instead of leaning on brakes that fade. Telling a driver to shut the system off on a downgrade is asking him to rely on the one thing most likely to fail him at the worst possible moment. Plenty of drivers read the sign, weigh a fine that might never come against a runaway that could kill them, and leave the engine brake on. The argument has never been fully settled, and the signs are still going up. So step back and look at the whole strange shape of it. A device dreamed up by a man who nearly died for the lack of one. A device that turns the engine itself into a brake that cannot fade, that helped turn the runaway truck from a common hazard into a rare one, that the American Society of Mechanical Engineers named a National Historic Mechanical Engineering Landmark back in 1985. In 2022, more than 60 years after his own company turned the idea down, Cummins bought the Jacobs brake business and finally brought Clessie's invention home. It is standard equipment on nearly every heavy truck in the country, and in the very towns that cling to the sides of the mountains, the law tells drivers to switch it off. But the paradox was never really the brake against the town. Look closely, and it dissolves. The thing people are trying to silence is a noise, and most of that noise comes from a straight pipe, not from the brake doing its job. A well-muffled truck can hold itself back on a grade and be far quieter, The fight was never safety against quiet. It was quiet against a missing muffler, with a life-saving device caught in the middle. The signs are still there, the grades are still there, and every driver who reads one still makes the same quiet calculation about which risk he is willing to take. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe and watch the next video above.